In chapter 11, God's people are introduced to all kinds of dietary restrictions and obligations. And of course, whenever these passages are studied, the scholars are left somewhat scratching their heads to figure out exactly why God declares certain animals to be clean and others to be unclean. What seems to be the motivation or the logic behind these apparently arbitrary distinctions? Well, some people say it's because many of these animals were being used by the surrounding nations in their worship of false gods. And so maybe God is preempting what will happen down the line when their cultures collide with one another. The Israelites will be, by that point, so entrenched into thinking that these certain animals are unclean that they will want nothing to do with a culture that uses those animals in the worship of their false gods. Well, maybe. A lot more work has gone into seeing how the dietary laws are perhaps preserving the health of the Jewish people. Many diseases and much bacteria is carried in the animals that are classed as unclean here. The clean animals were significantly healthier for the Jewish people to eat, especially considering the conditions in which those animals were kept and then cooked. Interestingly enough, it's only been in more recent years that we've had a better understanding of food hygiene and viruses that we've been able to understand that this is actually true. Listen to this quote. "It is now known that the pig is the intermediate host for several parasitic organisms, some of which can result in tapeworm infestation. One of these worms grows to about 2.5 meters in length and is found in poorly cooked pork. Even with the command to avoid fish without scales, we see the same principles apply. These type of fish go along the bottom of the sea. They are known to pick up all kinds of parasites as they go." There are lots of other possible reasons for these restrictions to be imposed. I read somewhere that these suggested reasons fall into several categories. You ready for this? Symbolic, ethical, aesthetic, hygienic, morphological, and theological criteria. Now, I'm not even sure what all of those words mean. Now, notice that we are so desperate to find the meaning behind what God has said that it's just worth observing that fact for a moment. Why is that? Why are we so desperate to know why God calls his people to live in certain ways? What difference does it make? If God is God, and he is, and if he has the right to direct our lives, and he does, surely our job is just to obey. I think the understanding that these commands were given to preserve their health is probably a pretty reasonable interpretation. But please do not miss this. This is so important. That information is information that we have gathered over recent years. It is not an explanation that was given by God at the time as to why his people should obey. God didn't say, "Here are my 6 reasons, and I really hope you do agree with them because I'd rather you kept these laws." No, he's God. So he just lays down the law, and our job is to trust that whether he shares his reasons or not as to what he has done, he is looking out for our best interests. He does know what he is doing, and all that he does out of love for his people and glory for his own name. It's a question of trust, isn't it? We don't want our reflexive response towards God to be one of questioning, querying, doubting, or denying the authority of what God has said. We want our immediate response to say, "Yes, Lord, whatever you say, I will do." Now this, I think, is the real reason for these dietary laws, and especially for why there is no explanation accompanying them. God is creating a people who learn obedience. Just imagine for a moment an Israelite sitting down for a meal with a Canaanite. Unlikely, but just imagine for a moment. Now the Canaanite happens to be the one cooking, and there is the smell of bacon coming from the kitchen. And it smells wonderful, because, well, it does smell wonderful, doesn't it? And the Israelite has to say, "Oh, no, I'm sorry, I thought I mentioned I don't eat bacon." When the Canaanite asks why, and he inevitably will, the Israelite cannot say, "Well, actually, there's some recent scientific evidence that suggests that the likelihood of parasites in pork is significantly higher," and so on. Now, that explanation is actually not available to that ancient Israelite. He can't say that. What can he say? "I live like this because God tells me to." And that is a powerful witness to what is important to that particular person. What God says matters to me, and I obey him. Is the same true of us, I wonder? And do we demonstrate it with our lives, that what matters to us most is obedience to God because we love him? And if that is true, I think our lives would look different. If you only obey God when you see the reason behind his restriction, do you see that you're not making God your highest authority? You're making your reason, your understanding, your logic the highest authority, and God must fall in line with you. Here is the closest thing we get to an explanation from God in the passage. Verse 45. I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. There is a distinction in authority. Therefore, be holy, because I am holy. God is deliberately creating a culture which is different, set apart. That is what it means to be holy. You want to be able to look at the Israelites and say, well, they live in an obviously different, distinctive way. Why is that? Because they serve a different master, and they listen to him like they believe he is God.